January 11th, 1944. Skies over Brunswick, Germany. Major Heinz Baer banks his Flock 190 into attack position at 26,000 feet, the Knight's Cross cold against his throat. Below, American B-17 seconds lumber toward the aircraft factories. Fat, predictable targets he's killed dozens of times before. 204 victories, 3 years of mastery. He knows every American weakness, every gap in their formations. And he knows the rule that has kept him alive, the invisible line drawn across the sky in fuel and mathematics. Asterisk, the escorts always turn back at the border. Past that line, the bombers are ours. Past that line, we own the sky. Asterisk. He watches the P-47 Thunderbolts peel away west, right on schedule, fuel tanks nearly dry. Time to work. But then, silver shapes that should not exist. Sleek fighters still clinging to the bomber formation, impossibly deep into German airspace. Still there over Brunswick, still there over the target. Baer commits to an attack, and the enemy fighter matches his every move, outturns him where the air is thin, engine roaring where his FW-190 gasps and fades. He breaks away, hands trembling not from fear of death but from something far worse, the realization that the mathematics have been rewritten, that the war he understood, the war he was winning, just ended, and a new war has begun. Major Heinz Baer's FW-190 touches down at Rhine Airfield with a screech of rubber on frozen concrete, the propeller still windmilling as he kills the engine and sits motionless in the cockpit, staring at his hands. They're shaking, not the adrenaline tremor every pilot knows after combat, but something deeper, something that reaches into the marrow. In 3 years of war, across 500 combat missions, he has never felt this. Fear of death is an old companion, familiar and manageable. This is different. This is the fear of obsolescence, the terrible recognition that the rules governing his survival have been rewritten without warning, without his consent, and that he may already be a dead man who simply hasn't stopped breathing yet. His crew chief approaches, calling up congratulations. The major is back, another mission survived, but Baer waves him away and climbs down, his flight suit dark with sweat, despite the January cold. He needs to report this. Someone needs to understand what just happened in the sky over Brunswick, because if what he witnessed is real, if those silver fighters can truly fly that deep into Germany and still fight with the fury of fresh aircraft, then everything the Luftwaffe believes about air warfare is a lie built on sand. The intelligence officer at Rhine is Hauptmann Werner Fischer, a former bomber pilot with a methodical mind and a reputation for dismissing wild combat claims. He listens to Baer's report with the patient skepticism of a man who has heard 1,000 variations of "the enemy has a new secret weapon." Single-engine fighters escorting bombers to Brunswick, remaining over the target, fighting aggressively at 26,000 feet. Fischer does the mathematics on his notepad, scratching out fuel consumption calculations, distance from the nearest American bases in England, time over target, combat reserves. The numbers don't work. They can't work. A single-engine fighter carrying enough fuel to fly from England to Brunswick and back would need to be the size of a medium bomber, too heavy to maneuver, too sluggish to fight. The American P-47 Thunderbolts are already pushing the limits of physics. They can barely reach the German border before fuel forces them home. The P-38 Lightnings have slightly better range, but their twin engines gulp fuel at altitude. What Baer describes is thermodynamically impossible, a violation of the basic engineering constraints that have governed fighter design since the Wright brothers. Fischer tells him this gently, professionally. Perhaps the major saw P-47 seconds lingering longer than usual. Perhaps the altitude and the stress of combat distorted his perception of distance. Perhaps the American fighters were in fact turning back, but appeared to remain because of the way the formations were positioned. It happens. Combat is chaos. Memory is unreliable. Baer listens to this with the dead-eyed stare of a man watching his truth be buried alive, then stands without a word and walks out into the frozen afternoon. But within 48 hours, Fischer's notepad fills with reports that all say the same impossible thing. Oberleutnant Karl-Heinz Weber, over Oschersleben, engaged by unfamiliar silver fighters at extreme range, forced to break off attack on bombers, chased 15 miles by enemy aircraft that should have been heading home. Hauptmann Gerhard Luce, over Halberstadt. Bounced from above by sleek single-engine fighters, he initially mistook for FW-190 seconds until they began outturning his entire staffel at altitude where German fighters lose power and American escorts have always faded. Lieutenant Franz Stigler over Magdeburg watched 3 friends die in 60 seconds when silver fighters dove through their formation with the aggressive confidence of pilots who know they have fuel to burn, who know they own time itself. The pattern is undeniable. The Americans have deployed something new, something that breaks the fundamental equation of aerial warfare. Fischer forwards the reports up the chain of command with a cover note that reflects his own dawning horror. If these reports are accurate, Germany's 3-year advantage in the air war, the invisible fuel line that has protected the homeland from effective daylight bombing, has been erased overnight. At Luftwaffe High Command in Berlin, General Lieutenant Adolf Galland reads Fischer's report and feels the cold weight of strategic catastrophe settling onto his shoulders. Galland is no fool. At 31 years old with 104 confirmed kills, he is both a warrior and a thinker, a man who understands that tactics serve strategy, and that strategy must bend to reality or break against it. He has been General der Jagdflieger, General of the Fighter Arm, for 2 years, long enough to see the slow erosion of German advantages, the steady improvement of American equipment and training, the mounting losses that are never quite catastrophic, but never quite sustainable either. But this is different. This is not gradual erosion. This is a cliff edge. If American single-engine fighters can truly escort bombers to any target in Germany, then the entire German defensive strategy, built on the assumption that deep targets are unreachable with fighter protection, collapses into irrelevance. Galland orders his staff to pull every combat report mentioning these new American fighters. He wants aircraft type, performance characteristics, markings, everything. Within 3 days, his desk is buried in paper that all tells the same story. The Americans call it the P-51 Mustang. It has a British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine in an American airframe, a marriage of technologies that produces something neither nation could have built alone. And it has range, impossible, physics-defying, war-ending range, 850 miles on internal fuel, over 1,300 with disposable drop tanks. Enough to escort bombers to Berlin and still have fuel to fight on the way home. Enough to turn every target in Germany from a sanctuary into a shooting gallery. Enough to make German fighter pilots choose between engaging under impossible circumstances or watching their cities burn undefended. Galland requests an immediate meeting with Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, Commander-in-Chief of the Luftwaffe, the man who built this air force from nothing and who has led it through 5 years of war. Galland brings the evidence, fuel consumption calculations, captured drop tank specifications from downed P-51 seconds, combat reports from 24 separate engagements, projected attrition rates if current operations continue. He lays it all out in Göring's ornate office with its hunting trophies and Renaissance paintings, the spoils of conquest from a war that now seems to be slipping away. The P-51 changes everything, Galland explains. Germany must adapt immediately, withdraw fighters from daily operations, conserve strength, retrain pilots for new tactics that account for constant escort presence, consider developing long-range fighters of their own, even if it means sacrificing some performance for fuel capacity. But Göring, resplendent in a powder blue uniform, heavy with medals, waves the report away like smoke. Defeatist talk, impossible calculations. His engineers have assured him that no single-engine fighter can achieve such range without becoming a flying fuel tank. Useless in combat. The Americans are bluffing, or Galland's pilots are making excuses for poor performance, or the intelligence is simply wrong. German fighters are the best in the world, flown by the most experienced pilots, guided by doctrine, forged in victory after victory. Fighting spirit matters more than fuel capacity. Aggressive tactics overcome technical disadvantages. The Luftwaffe will continue daily operations at maximum intensity. The Reich must see its defenders in the sky. Morale demands it. Pride demands it. Tradition demands it. Galland leaves the meeting with the knowledge that he is commanding a force being fed into a thresher, and that the man with the power to stop it has chosen blindness over adaptation, comfort over truth, and that men are going to die because of it. The Luftwaffe's doctrine is not a document, but a religion, forged in the crucible of Poland, where German fighters swept obsolete opposition from the sky in days, baptized in France, where the Blitzkrieg proved that speed and aggression could shatter armies that outnumbered you 3-1, and consecrated on the Eastern Front, where pilots racked up kill totals that seemed impossible until they became routine. The doctrine is elegant in its simplicity. Fighters are interceptors, pure and deadly, built to climb fast, and kill quickly. Range is secondary because the enemy comes to you, over your cities, your factories, your homeland, and you rise to meet them with heavy cannons and overwhelming firepower. It worked in Poland. It worked in France. It worked in Russia. It should work now. But doctrine, like faith, becomes most rigid precisely when reality begins to suggest it might be wrong. And in the frozen winter of early 1944, reality is screaming a truth that Hermann Göring refuses to hear. The Americans have changed the game, and Germany is still playing by rules that no longer exist. What Göring cannot admit, what he dare not admit, because it would unravel his entire legacy, is that Germany tried to build long-range fighters and failed catastrophically. The Messerschmitt Me-210 was supposed to be a multi-role wonder weapon, a heavy fighter that could escort bombers deep into enemy territory and then turn on a mark and shred anything that challenged it. Instead, it was a disaster of such legendary proportions that pilots called it the Widowmaker, an aircraft so unstable and dangerous that it killed more German aircrew in training accidents than it ever did enemy fighters in combat. The Me-410 that replaced it is marginally better, which is to say it is merely mediocre instead of actively suicidal. But it still cannot compete with dedicated single-engine fighters, and its range, while better than the Fu-190 or Bf-109, falls far short of what the strategic situation demands. Germany's brilliant engineers, men who pioneered jet propulsion, swept wings, and rocket-powered interceptors, solved every problem except the one that mattered. They built fighters for a war of position, where the enemy comes to you, and you need only climb fast and hit hard. They never seriously considered that the war might demand pursuit, that victory might belong not to the fastest climber or the hardest hitter, but to the aircraft that could simply stay in the air long enough to protect its bombers and destroy yours. The Americans, with their simpler thinking and their pragmatic engineering culture, asked a different question entirely. How do we keep our fighters airborne long enough to do the job we need them to do? The answer was not elegant German over-engineering. It was brute force American pragmatism, bigger fuel tanks, better fuel management systems, a laminar flow wing design that reduced drag, a British engine that sipped fuel at cruise and roared with power when needed. Innovation by addition, not perfection. And it worked. In the ready rooms and dispersal huts scattered across Germany, the men who actually fight the war are doing their own calculations, and the mathematics they produce are the mathematics of death. Lieutenant Franz Stigler sits in the cold concrete bunker at Gardelegen Airfield, watching 3 empty chairs where his friends sat yesterday morning. Hermann Buchner, 23 years old, 7 kills, shot down over Bavaria by a P-51 that appeared out of nowhere 400 miles from the nearest American base. Klaus Dieter, 25, 11 kills, bounced over Frankfurt by Mustangs that had escorted bombers to Schweinfurt and still had enough fuel to hunt on the way home. Rolf Hartmann, 21, 4 kills, rammed trying to break through a wall of P-51 seconds to reach the bombers, because the only way to get to the Americans now is through their escorts, and the escorts have every advantage. Stigler has 28 kills himself, earned over 3 years in North Africa and the Eastern Front, and he understands with crystalline clarity that those victories mean nothing anymore. The war he learned to fight, the war of aggressive slashing attacks, diving through escorts that would turn back at the fuel line, striking bombers and escaping before the defenders could react, that war is over. The new war is a war of attrition, and attrition is a game Germany cannot win because Germany does not have infinite pilots or infinite aircraft or infinite fuel, and the Americans, increasingly, do. Major Günther Röhl, one of the most successful aces in history with 275 kills, earned primarily in the meat grinder of the Eastern Front, transfers to Western Air Defense in late January and gets his education in the new reality within a week. His first mission against American bombers is a study in frustration that curdles rapidly into horror. The bombers come in massive formations, their contrails writing white lines across the winter sky for what seems like hours, and the escorts are everywhere, above the bombers, below them, weaving through the formations like protective wolves, and always with enough fuel to maintain their positions and to chase any German fighter that tries the old tactics. Röhl leads his group in a high-speed diving attack, the classic Luftwaffe approach. Use altitude advantage to build speed, slash through the escorts faster than they can react, hit the bombers with cannon fire, dive away before the escorts can turn. It should work. It has worked 1,000 times before. But the P-51 seconds follow him down through 15,000 feet, through 10,000, through 5,000, still on his tail with ammunition to spare and fuel enough to chase him to ground level if needed. He loses 4 pilots on that first mission, not shot down by bombers, killed by escorts that, according to every German engineering manual, should have been heading home an hour ago, fuel tanks on empty, unable to maintain combat operations this deep into German airspace. But they are not heading home. They are right here, right now, and they are killing German pilots with the methodical efficiency of men who know they have time on their side. The reports that flow into Adolf Galland's office throughout February tell the same story in a dozen different voices. But the underlying truth is monolithic and undeniable. The Luftwaffe is being bled white. Not by American bombers, but by American fighters that have made every defensive mission a death sentence. Galland reads pilot testimonies that speak of P-51 seconds at altitudes where German fighters gasp for power, of escorts that appear over targets German commanders insisted were beyond American reach, of fighters shot down at their own airfields by Mustangs that still had fuel to strafe after completing escort missions 300 miles away. He reads casualty reports that show a steady, irreversible climb in pilot deaths, not the catastrophic single-day bloodbaths that make headlines, but the grinding daily attrition that destroys an air force more surely than any single battle could. And he reads his own projections, the cold mathematics that show the Luftwaffe day fighter force ceasing to exist as an effective combat arm within 4 months, if current loss rates continue. He takes this information to Goering a second time, and then a third, each time refining his presentation, each time making the strategic catastrophe more explicit, more undeniable. And each time Goering dismisses it. Continue operations, maintain aggressive posture, show the people that their Luftwaffe is fighting. Morale demands it, pride demands it. And so the missions continue, and the losses mount, and in scattered airfields across Germany, veteran pilots sit in ready rooms doing their own calculations, figuring out how many missions they have left before the odds catch up, and the number is never high enough to offer comfort. The mathematics of survival have become the mathematics of execution, and every pilot knows it, even if their commanders will not admit it. The Americans call it Operation Argument, a name that suggests reasoned debate and careful deliberation. But the German pilots who survive it will remember it by a different name entirely: Big Week. 6 days in late February 1944 when the sky catches fire and the Luftwaffe bleeds faster than anyone thought possible. The plan is brutally simple in conception and staggering in scale. Launch maximum effort bombing raids against Germany's aircraft production facilities and supporting infrastructure, force the Luftwaffe to rise in defense, and then destroy German fighters in the air and on the ground until there are no more fighters left to rise. It is not a battle. It is an execution, carried out with industrial efficiency and overwhelming force, and it begins on February 20th with a bomber stream so massive that it takes 11 minutes to pass overhead. Wave after wave of B-17 seconds and B-24 seconds protected by swarms of P-51 Mustangs, P-47 Thunderbolts, and P-38 Lightnings that blanket the sky like a silver plague. Major Günther Rohl leads his group into the maelstrom over Schweinfurt on day 1, climbing through broken cloud at 25,000 feet, and even before he reaches combat altitude, he knows this is different. The bomber formation stretches from horizon to horizon, a river of aluminum and high explosive flowing east toward the ball-bearing factories that keep Germany's war machine turning. And the escorts are not scattered or tentative, but aggressively positioned at every altitude, weaving through the bomber formations like protective hounds that have been given free rein to kill. Rohl's tactical brain processes the geometry instantly. There is no way through, no gap to exploit, no altitude advantage sufficient to overcome the sheer density of American fighters. But orders are orders, and doctrine demands that German fighters engage, that they be seen defending the Reich, and so he leads his Staffel into a high-speed diving attack, building velocity until his FOA 190 shudders on the edge of compressibility, aiming for a gap between escort elements that closes even as he approaches it. The P-51 seconds come from above and behind, diving faster than his fighters can climb, turning inside his evasive maneuvers with ease, at altitudes where German fighters traditionally held the advantage. Rohl shoots down one Mustang in a head-on pass that leaves his windscreen cracked and his propeller damaged, but in the same 60 seconds he watches 4 of his pilots die, not disappear into clouds or dive away trailing smoke with a chance of survival, but explode in mid-air or spiral down in flames with no possibility of escape. 4 men he trained personally. 4 irreplaceable combat veterans. Gone in a minute because they tried to do their duty against an enemy that owns time itself. By day 3, Luftwaffe units across Germany are flying at half strength, not because aircraft are unavailable, but because pilots are dead or wounded, or so psychologically shattered they cannot be cleared for combat. The replacement pilots arriving from training schools are boys with 150 flight hours facing American veterans in aircraft that are superior in every category that matters. It is not combat, it is pedagogical slaughter, a flying lesson written in blood, and the German instructors who survive long enough to recognize what is happening can do nothing except watch their students die and know that they will be next. Oberleutnant Johannes Steinhoff, a thoughtful warrior who keeps a meticulous diary, writes on February 22nd, "We are being bled white, not by bombers, but by their escorts. The Mustangs have turned every mission into a death lottery. We can still win individual combats. Our pilots are skilled, our tactics sound, our courage undiminished, but we cannot win the war of attrition. We no longer have the advantage of position, they have the advantage of time, and time, in war, is the advantage that matters most." Steinhoff loses his 3rd wingman of the week, the day after writing those words. A 20-year-old from Munich who had 7 hours of combat experience and lasted approximately 4 minutes against a flight of P-51 seconds that bounced his Schwarm over Augsburg. The boy's name was Peter Keller, and he died believing he was defending his homeland, which he was, but he also died because his commanders sent him into a battle they knew was unwinnable, and that distinction is one that Steinhoff will carry for the rest of his life. The mathematics become inescapable by day 4. Before Big Week, an experienced German fighter pilot could reasonably expect to survive 30 combat missions, perhaps 40 if he was skilled and lucky. The calculation was brutal but manageable, a reasonable gamble for men who understood that war is inherently a game of probabilities. By the middle of Big Week, that number has collapsed to 8 missions. Perhaps 10 if you are very lucky and very good, perhaps 5 if you are neither. The attrition rate is not sustainable, not strategically, not tactically, not psychologically. Pilots are doing mental arithmetic in their bunks at night, counting missions flown versus missions remaining. And the numbers offer no comfort because everyone knows someone who died on their 2nd mission, or their 15th, or their 28th. And the randomness is almost worse than the certainty would be. At least certainty can be planned for. Randomness offers only dread. February 25th is the day the Luftwaffe breaks. Not visibly, not in any way that would show up in official communications or command decisions, but in the hearts and minds of the men who fly, there is a collective recognition that this cannot continue, that the strategic situation has become hopeless, that they are fighting now not for victory, but simply to make the Americans pay a price for German deaths. 355 fighters lost in a single day. Not all to combat, many destroyed on the ground by P-51 seconds that, after escorting bombers to targets across Germany, still have enough fuel to drop to low altitude and strafe airfields, destroying fighters before they can take off, killing pilots as they run for their aircraft, turning German bases into free fire zones, where the hunted cannot even reach their weapons before the hunters arrive. The impossible has become routine. The unthinkable has become normal. American fighters own German airspace at every altitude, in every weather condition, at every time of day, and the Luftwaffe, the force that conquered Poland in weeks and France in days, and seemed destined to rule the skies of Europe forever, has been reduced to a regional defense force, fighting a delaying action against an enemy that grows stronger while Germany grows weaker. That night, scattered across airfields from Bavaria to the North Sea, exhausted pilots sit in cold, ready rooms and do the calculations that no one wants to speak aloud. The mathematics are simple and terrible. At current loss rates, the Luftwaffe Day fighter force will cease to exist as a coherent military organization within 3 months. Not defeated in a single climactic battle that might at least offer the dignity of heroic last stands and glorious sacrifice, but ground down mission by mission, day by day, killed in 1s and 2s and 4s, until there is no one left who remembers how it felt to own the sky. Major Heinz Behr, who has survived since the first day of the war, who has 204 kills and more combat experience than almost any pilot alive, sits alone and stares at a map of Germany with his finger tracing routes that used to be safe, routes where German fighters could operate without expecting to encounter escorts, routes that represented the strategic depth that kept the homeland secure. There are no safe routes anymore. Nowhere is beyond American reach. Nowhere offers sanctuary. The P-51 Mustang has rewritten the geography of the air war, and every line bear traces now ends in fire. For 3 years, Berlin has been untouchable, a sanctuary beyond the reach of American daylight bombers, too far and too deep into Germany to be practical for raids that would cost more aircraft than they could possibly be worth. The British bomb it at night, when darkness offers some protection and the chaos of urban areas makes precision unnecessary. But daylight raids require fighter escort to survive, and no fighter in the American inventory has the range to escort bombers to Berlin and back. Or so every German planner believes, right up until the morning of March 4th, 1944, when air raid sirens begin wailing across the Reich capital at 10:47 a.m., and civilians who have grown accustomed to the routine of nighttime raids look up in confusion at a sound that should not exist in daylight hours. The massive droning roar of hundreds of heavy bomber engines, American engines, directly overhead. The psychological impact is seismic, an earthquake in the collective German consciousness that shifts the foundation of every assumption about the war. If Berlin can be reached by American bombers in broad daylight, then nowhere is safe. Not the factories in the Ruhr, not the headquarters complexes in Bavaria, not Hitler's mountain retreat, not anywhere. The invisible shield of distance that has protected the German homeland, the same shield that allowed Britain to survive the Blitz by simply being an island too far for German fighters to effectively escort their bombers, has been shattered by the same weapon system, long-range, single-engine fighters that render geography irrelevant and turn every target into a vulnerable location. The people in the streets stare upward at contrails writing white scars across the cold March sky, and they understand in a way that no propaganda can spin or deny that the war has fundamentally changed, that the shield is broken, that the Americans are no longer coming to the borders but coming everywhere, and there is nothing that can stop them. Hauptmann Heinz Noack scrambles with every available aircraft from Jagerschwader 11, every pilot who can be strapped into a fighter, every machine that can still fly after the bleeding of Big Week. The plan is the oldest in the Luftwaffe playbook, the tactic that worked in 1940 and 1941, and even into 1942, overwhelm the escorts with numbers, accept casualties among the fighters to break through to the bombers, make the Americans pay such a terrible price in lost heavy aircraft that they will never come back, that the cost-benefit analysis will force them to abandon daylight precision bombing in favor of the safer but less effective night area bombing the British employ. It is a sound plan. It should work. It has worked before. But that was when escorts turned back at the German border, when American fighters had to choose between protecting bombers or engaging German interceptors, when fuel limitations forced tactical compromises that German pilots could exploit. None of those conditions exist anymore. The P-51 seconds over Berlin fight with the same aggressive confidence they show over France, the same fuel reserves, the same tactical freedom. They do not husband their ammunition or conserve their energy for the flight home. They fight like men who know they have time on their side, altitude to burn, fuel to waste, and all the tactical initiative that comes from being able to choose when to engage and when to disengage. Noack leads his group in a climbing attack, trying to use superior numbers to create a gap in the escort coverage, and the Mustangs come down from above like hunting hawks, diving faster than the German fighters can climb, turning inside their evasive maneuvers, shooting with the calm precision of men who have done this 100 times before. Noack manages to shoot down one P-51 inches, a violent head-on pass that leaves his propeller damaged and his nerves shredded. But in the process of killing one American fighter, he loses 3 wingmen. Hans Becker, shot down in flames over Potsdam, 23 years old with 9 kills. Werner Schmidt collided with another Foy 190 while evading a Mustang, and both pilots killed instantly. Friedrich Meyer, last seen diving toward the ground with his engine smoking and no parachute visible. 3 men dead to kill 1 enemy fighter, and the bombers they were trying to reach continue unmolested to their targets, drop their loads, and turn for home while P-51 seconds continue to patrol above them like guardian angels with machine guns. The mathematics of March 4th are crushing in their simplicity and devastating in their implications. 69 German fighters destroyed, 20 pilots killed outright, 7 more wounded too severely to return to combat. In exchange, the Americans lose 11 bombers and 5 escort fighters. The exchange rate is fatal, unsustainable, a death spiral that cannot be arrested by courage or skill or determination. If this is the new normal, if every major raid produces losses like this, then the Luftwaffe Day fighter force will cease to exist as an effective military organization within 16 weeks. Not depleted, not weakened, destroyed, erased from the order of battle as surely as if every aircraft had been bombed on the ground and every pilot shot. And everyone knows it. In the ready rooms that evening, pilots sit in silence or speak in the flat tones of men discussing their own executions, because that is what it has become. Not combat, but scheduled death, a death sentence carried out one mission at a time until there are no more pilots left to sentence. Lieutenant Heinz Marquardt survives March 4th by luck and the intervention of a cloud bank that allows him to break contact with two P-51 seconds that have chased him from 20,000 feet down to the deck. He lands with his fuel tanks nearly dry and his hands shaking so badly he can barely sign his combat report, and in that report he writes something that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. Something that would have gotten him court-martialed for defeatism in the early years of the war. We are no longer fighting for victory. We are fighting to make them pay for our deaths. The strategic situation is hopeless. The Americans have aircraft that can reach anywhere in Germany. They have pilots who are becoming more experienced with every mission, while ours die faster than we can replace them. They have fuel to fight over our capital, with the same intensity they fight over their own bases. We have courage and skill and determination, and none of it matters anymore, because we are trying to win a war of attrition against an enemy with infinite resources, and we have only finite men. He is 24 years old, he has 13 kills, he will be dead in 28 days. Not shot down in air combat, but killed when his airfield at Kassel is strafed by P-51 seconds that escorted bombers to Augsburg and still had enough fuel on the return leg to drop to low altitude and destroy 16 German fighters on the ground, killing 8 pilots who never reached their aircraft in time to defend themselves. That evening, Adolf Galland presents Hermann Göring with a comprehensive report on the March 4th mission, detailed loss figures, pilot testimonies, tactical analysis, and strategic projections. The conclusion is inescapable. At current attrition rates, the Luftwaffe will lose its ability to conduct daylight defensive operations within 4 months. The P-51 has fundamentally altered the strategic balance. Germany must either develop effective countermeasures immediately, new tactics, new aircraft, new doctrine, or accept that the daylight sky over Germany belongs to America. Göring reads the report in silence, his face reddening with each page, and then orders operations to continue at maximum intensity. There is no alternative, he insists. To stop flying defensive missions is to abandon the German people. To surrender the sky without a fight, to admit defeat. Better to die fighting than to live having surrendered. It is the mentality of a warrior, and it is the mentality that will destroy his air force, because sometimes the bravest choice is the wrong choice, and sometimes pride kills more men than cowardice ever could. By late spring of 1944, the Luftwaffe Day fighter force is a hollowed-out shell of its former self, a ghost army that still appears on order of battle charts, but exists in reality only as scattered remnants of what was once the most feared aerial combat force in the world. The veterans who survived Poland and France, and the early years of the Eastern Front, men with hundreds of kills, men who believed themselves invincible, men who formed the backbone of German air superiority, are mostly dead now, their names carved into stone memorials or lost entirely in crashes that left no remains to bury. Their replacements are boys with barely enough flight time to land safely in crosswinds, thrust into combat against American pilots who have flown 50 missions and know every trick, every tactic, every way to exploit the advantages their P-51 Mustangs provide. The replacement pilots' last days if they are lucky, hours if they are not, and their deaths do not even merit individual mention anymore, because there are too many to count, and too few people left who remember their names. Major Johannes Steinhoff stands in a military cemetery outside Munich on a grey April morning, burying his 7th wingman of the year, and the arithmetic of that statement is so devastating that it takes a moment to fully comprehend. 7 wingmen in 4 months. 7 young men assigned to fly on his wing, to learn from his experience, to be protected by his skill and guided by his tactical knowledge. All dead. The man he is burying today is named Gerhard Fischer, 20 years old, 3 confirmed kills to his credit, which in the insane calculus of 1944 makes him a combat veteran of significant value. 3 kills. In 1942, that would have marked him as a promising rookie. In 1943, it would have made him a competent pilot worth keeping alive. In 1944, it makes him a veteran whose death represents a significant loss of combat capability, because there is almost no one left with more experience, and the men coming up behind him have even less. Fischer died over Stuttgart when his engine was hit by a P-51 that appeared out of cloud cover, with the casual efficiency of a predator that knows the hunting is easy, that knows the prey is exhausted and outnumbered, and flying aircraft that are increasingly obsolete. Steinhoff stood on the ground and listened to Fischer's last radio transmission, calm, professional, reporting that his engine was gone and he was going down, and felt nothing. Because after 7 wingmen you have no emotion left, only the cold recognition that you are attending funerals for an entire generation, and that you yourself are living on borrowed time. Germany does eventually adapt, but the adaptation comes too late and in insufficient numbers to alter the strategic trajectory. By the fall of 1944, the Luftwaffe has shifted tactics to emphasize hit-and-run attacks, using ground-controlled intercept radar to position fighters advantageously, avoiding prolonged engagements that favor the Americans' numerical superiority and fuel reserves. They develop massed formation attacks where entire Geschwaders strike single bomber formations simultaneously, accepting catastrophic losses among the attackers to destroy enough bombers to justify the exchange. They deploy the Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter, a technological marvel that can outrun any piston-engine aircraft in the sky, and whose 430mm cannons can destroy a B-17 with a single burst. These innovations work, tactically speaking. The Me-262 is virtually untouchable in high-speed slashing attacks. Massed formations can overwhelm even heavy escort and inflict significant bomber losses. Ground-controlled intercepts allow German fighters to avoid disadvantageous combats and engage only when conditions favor them. But none of it matters strategically, because the innovations come too late, are produced in too small numbers, and cannot overcome the fundamental problem. The P-51 Mustang rewrote the rules of air warfare, and Germany spent 1944 trying to win by the old rules. By the time German doctrine adapted to the new reality, the Luftwaffe had lost too many irreplaceable pilots, too much tactical cohesion, too many aircraft, and, most critically, too much time. What Germany never solves is the question that should have been asked in 1943, but was not asked until it was far too late. What does this war actually require our fighters to do? The German answer was built on the experiences of 1939 and 1940. Fighters must intercept enemy bombers over the homeland and destroy them before they can drop their ordnance. Range is secondary because the bombers come to you. Armament is critical because heavy bombers require heavy weapons to kill. Climb rate is essential because altitude advantage wins fights. All of these answers were correct for the war Germany was fighting in 1940. None of them were correct for the war Germany was fighting in 1944, because in 1944 the critical question was not how to shoot down bombers, but how to reach the bombers through an impenetrable screen of long-range escorts that could fight at any altitude, at any distance, with fuel enough to chase German fighters to ground level and still return home safely. Germany never built an aircraft designed to answer that question, because Germany never seriously asked it, and by the time the question became unavoidable, there was no time left to design the answer. The human legacy of this doctrinal failure is written in blood and carved in stone across 1,000 cemeteries. In post-war interviews conducted years after the guns fell silent, surviving German aces speak with a mixture of respect and bitterness about the P-51, about the aircraft that ended their dominance and killed their friends, and shattered the carefully constructed mythology of German aerial supremacy. Major Günther Röhl, who survived the war with 275 kills and a body so scarred from crashes and wounds that he could barely walk without pain, says in a 1968 interview, "The P-51 was the best fighter of the war, not because it was the fastest, though it was fast, not because it was the most heavily armed, because it was not, but because it was there. Everywhere, all the time, at every altitude, over every target. You cannot win a war when the enemy owns the sky above your capital, above your factories, above your airfields. We were better pilots, man for man. We flew good aircraft. We fought with skill and courage. And we lost, because someone else understood the war better than we did." General Lieutenant Adolf Galland, the fighter chief who saw the catastrophe coming and could not stop it, who presented evidence and projections and mathematical proofs that were all ignored, says in his 1954 memoir, "The P-51 was not a technological miracle. It was a practical solution to a strategic problem. Germany could have built such an aircraft. We had the engines, The Daimler-Benz DB 603 and the Junkers Jumo 213 both had sufficient power. We had the aerodynamics. Our engineers understood laminar flow and low-drag design. We had the manufacturing capability. What we lacked was not capability, but clarity of purpose. We built the fighters our doctrine demanded, not the fighters the war required. That distinction killed 20,000 German pilots. Franz Stigler, the ace who famously escorted a crippled B-17 to safety in December 1943, and who survived the war to befriend the American pilot he saved, perhaps articulates the lesson most clearly in a 1991 interview given shortly before his death. The P-51 did not defeat the Luftwaffe because it was a better fighter. It defeated us because it was a better answer. We were the best pilots in the world, flying excellent aircraft, fighting with courage and skill that has never been surpassed. And we lost. Not because we were weak, but because someone else was smarter. That is the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes your best is not enough. Sometimes the other side simply thinks more clearly about what the war demands. Germany paid for that lesson in blood. 20,000 pilots. An entire generation of young men. That is the price of fighting the war you want to fight instead of the war you need to fight. And it is a lesson that should never be forgotten.